Hello and welcome to another episode of 18-Minute Experts, the podcast where we unpack big ideas in group benefits, all in the time it takes to get a noontime workout in. I'm your host, Michael Kettner, and today we're exploring a unique topic that's often overlooked: cross-border group benefit plans. This is an area that once expertise is built up, you can truly set yourself apart from your peers. To help us navigate this complex landscape, I'm thrilled to be joined by Ned Havern, president of Havern Benefit Strategies. Ned and his team specialize in advising Canadian-owned companies and advisors as they enter the United States. His niche in national and global cross-border benefits makes him the perfect guest for today's conversation. But before we dive in, just a quick reminder: if you're enjoying this podcast, hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can also find us at www.peoplecorporation.com/18minexperts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a quick review, as that really helps us reach more advisors just like you. All right, let's get into it. Ned, welcome to the show. Let's dive in. Ned, I am really excited to have you on the podcast today. Cross-border management of group benefit plans is an area that many Canadian advisors overlook, and I think it's a missed opportunity. You bring more than a decade of experience working on both sides of the border in group benefits consulting, so I can't wait to dive in. But I also know you have a bit of a varied past. Like, your path into group benefits was not the usual path. So I'm curious to find out. Tell us a little bit about your background and what's led you to this moment here.
Oh, geez, let's see. So fortunately for a lot of Canadian counterparts that we work with, I lived a life very much focused around a hockey puck for many years. So I went to Boston College, got drafted by the Dallas Stars, chased what I call the buses through the minor league armpits of America. So saw plenty of cities that we've had to do insurance in, but most importantly, followed that dream for quite some time. And like I say, I was so good at hockey that I'm in insurance. So that answers the question. I think at my first training camp, I was number 70. And if you're ever number 70 on a team, you're probably not going to be there for long. So I didn't spend much time in Dallas, but it still is on paper that we got drafted there. So that was great. But no, honestly, it's actually in this later life, which I kind of started in the benefits world. There's a ton of overlap with not only just the Canadian, I would say, culture is surrounded by hockey, but there's just a lot of people in it. And it's certainly a conversation piece and has led to some great relationships that fortunately have blossomed into some partnerships on some work stuff too, which is fun.
But that's such a unique path, right? Like, to go from hockey, like, at what point did you decide, no, group benefits, especially cross-border group benefits, is where I want to spend my time?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I started a little bit in commercial real estate and transitioned to the insurance side. One, because I thought it was definitely something of interest that you didn't really reset every year. You know, the thought process, and anyone that's building a book of business is you don't start at zero every year. A goal is to always retain a lot of the great client relationships you have. And then for us, while insurance is a very wide range industry, we found a niche that we thought we could really focus in. And through the brokerage network, as well as a lot of cross-border activity, meaning companies in Canada that were either acquiring or organically growing in the U.S., there was a huge opportunity. And we thought that, in this wide range of an industry that we're very guilty of saying we do everything, I thought it would be really smart to focus in one lane, which was really that Canadian company as they expand to the U.S. and how can we help be somewhat bilingual for them and connect some dots.
Yeah, there's definitely value in specializing and separating yourself into that lane or that niche or whatever you want to say. What was it like when you were first getting your clients for cross-border? Like, was there any unique challenges that you had to break through?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think there's always a disconnect. Well, the biggest problem, and what always jumps off the page first, is it's 10 times more expensive in the US. So, like, naturally, when these conversations begin, there's a sticker shock that leads into every discussion. But I think in the US, while it's 10 times more, it's very much part of the compensation package. So I think Canadians, healthcare is almost assumed, right, to some extent. And then everything else is kind of an ancillary additional element of their benefits package. But in the US, it's so costly that it's really just part of the total compensation package. And if you want to, in a very competitive marketplace as the Canadian marketplace is, like if you want to hire and retain in the US, you've got to have the benefits package on par with your industry, or else you'll get to that goal line for that member that has 3 kids and they just won't come work for you. So I think it's a critical piece in any company, whether it's, a manufacturing company or a tech company. You've got to be at the top of your sector. And that's really where we kind of take a step back and kind of drill down on making it cost effective, but also something you can sustain over time. Because fortunately, I think we feel really good a lot of the times, and even just our introductory conversations, because there's a management team, right? An HR team, a CFO, they know the Canadian stuff cold. But the US stuff is really where there might be some confusion. It's way too expensive. Can somebody walk me through it? And hopefully that's where the dialogue typically begins.
You're right. Cost is one of the big differentiators between Canadian and U.S. benefits. But when I dug into it a little bit, one of the things that surprised me was that, yeah, healthcare costs are really high in the States, but long-term disability rates compared to Canada are a lot lower. And what I found out when I dug into it a bit was it was because U.S. citizens have access to hospitals and MRIs like now. There's no wait lists. Like you can just get surgery, you can get your MRI, you're in, and it was a significant impact on the LTD rates. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, what are the other differences other than cost between Canadian and US benefits?
We bring up a wonderful point. I think the access to healthcare and especially the timing of it is very, very, I would say, advantageous on the US side, right? But on the other side of that, like you look at some of the costs to add your family to some of these plans and it's wounding, right? Like it can be very, very costly. But I always say it's important to have a frame of reference too, right? So in Boston where I live, or New York or San Francisco, an overnight in the hospital is $12,000 to $15,000. So I just had my third child and we did not have a C-section. So we were pretty standard pregnancy in the hospital for 3 days, 2 nights. That bill was somewhere in the nature of $140,000 when we left. So that might seem like a massive number, but the fact that my wife and we knew the maximum we could pay is $7,000, and you look at kind of the all-in cost, you have a little bit of a more relative understanding of it. So I think what's hard is when a lot of Canadian companies look at some of these premium costs and they look at what members have to pay, there's also an understanding where if you've been a U.S. employee for 10, 15 years, you're accustomed to that, right? So it's really just connecting the dots. And I always say, like, where things are similar is the easy part, but where you've got to take your Canadian hat off to really get a frame of reference on the medical stuff. And that's where 90% of the spend is. And you want them to be with a good network so that everyone can receive in-network care. So that's always important. And there's just a lot of steps to it. And it's a very sensitive piece of a U.S. hire, right? Because if you think about it, like myself, I've got a couple kids. Like that's it. Before I make a job transition, that is a huge piece of the discussion.
You bring up an interesting point with the network and being in network. I know a lot of times when I talk with US companies that are looking to expand into Canada, one of the questions that they ask is, oh, how does it work in network, out of network? And we don't have that up here, right? Like most things are covered by the province when it comes to emergency services and hospital and whatnot. So maybe describe the other way, how it works in the States.
Yeah, no, and it's very much really there's 4 national carriers. There's some regional carriers that, like, if all of your employees are in Rhode Island, for example, you might be able to get away with a regional carrier. But if you've got, a commonplace now is you've got 15 employees in 5 different states. So you want to accommodate all of them. So you're really kind of then forced to be with 4 of the big national carriers. And what's important is that means they have a network throughout the U.S., right? So while that one regional vendor is great in Rhode Island, it wouldn't work for someone in Ohio. So you're kind of then tasked with, of those big kind of guerrilla networks, which ones are largest in the areas you're in, because yes, there might be an out-of-network benefit, but it's far more costly for that employee. So you've got members in California, they want to make sure that the providers that they see are in network because there's a big cost swing. And that's certainly disruptive. I mean, what if you want your child to receive a surgery from a particular surgeon? Like, we want to make sure it's a maximum network of access for our employees. You're going to pay so much for it. You want to make sure it works when obviously these members need the help.
And that's the other thing that I heard was significantly different compared to Canadian group benefits. Each state has its own legislation for how it interacts with group benefits. So it's not a one size fits all like it mostly is up here in Canada. Each state has its own insurers, its own legislation. Why don't you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, and it's tricky. We've got 50 different states, and that's one area where I think we are frequently writing business in so many different states that we understand a lot of the idiosyncrasies of the various states. Like, even now we have family leave coverage, right, which is a form of short-term disability. It is different in every state. So how your member in New York is treated opposed to your member from Arizona is wildly different. So it becomes really, really challenging if you think of the HR director in Toronto that's trying to figure this out on the fly. It's just tough to keep up with because it's just not federally mandated. So each state kind of slowly lets this thing evolve. So I think safely, we always try to put groups in multiple states with one of those carriers that we know has a presence throughout almost. And then from there, you've got to always be getting feedback from your employees where, hey, if you pay $1 million for your group, you want to know these employees are getting the proper care as well. So that's always kind of a balancing act where, okay, it looks great on paper, but like, what's everyone saying? Like, is it working? Like, are all their children's facilities and is there OBGYN? Is that in network? Like, that stuff's all really, really important as you make that vendor selection year to year.
The other thing I heard, and just correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I might be on this, that organizations under 50 employees have a very cookie cutter option of it. Like, there really isn't options. It's the over 50 that all of a sudden you have options and you can customize and all that. Or am I completely off?
It's not that there's more options. It's a little bit more pooled, I would say, in the under 50 market. Technically, in the under 50 market in the U.S., you're not mandated to offer a plan. Now, on the flip side of that, and we have these conversations daily where you don't have to offer a plan, but the minute you go hire Fred with 3 children, he's not coming to work for you. So yeah, it's not mandated, but it's going to be tough to hire and retain, right? So you've got to have that. What's unique in our market, in which Canadian advisors always kind of shake their head at, and this might belittle myself a bit, but they're like, well, what do you guys do? Because we don't get claims information until a group is 100 employees for 1 calendar year. So while a Canadian broker could come in a group of 12 people and they can talk about loss ratios or a cancer claim, or they can kind of dig into, okay, here's why you're receiving this above trend increase. We don't receive that information until you're 100 a year later. So unfortunately, for a lot of these discussions, 12 to 15% is most importantly medical trend in the U.S. Has been for the last 15 years. So if you receive that 23% increase, more often than not, the HR director probably has a better idea about that claim than I do because I'm not armed with any of the data. They just don't provide it. They won't. So what also on the flip side of that, not to transition too much, is like, yes, I don't have that data, but what happens is a lot of these now national vendors, they're not going to buy a piece of business, right? Rate it up, rate it really low the first year in kind of knowing they're going to hit you the next year. You give the same census to these 4 national vendors, they're all going to be priced pretty similarly. So yes, we market every year, but you don't have a different broker that comes in and gets an undercut rate because he works for a big firm and then the tables flip the next year. So it's a little bit more commoditized in the sense where you pick the advisor based on the support you're getting, not on the deal they could get you year one, if that makes sense. So like there's a little bit less of like the marketing exercise and more so like, what are we getting from you, our partner? And then a lot of the times they're like, and I totally understand it. If I have a 25 life group, they have a 23% increase. We're talking a number that's probably like $400,000 or $500,000 and you've got nothing for me and we don't know of any claims. Like those are difficult conversations to have for sure.
But is that a conversation that most people expect at that level? Like, is
you try to prepare people for it, but it's not easy to digest when you say, hey, we don't know of anything that happened. How do we know they're not just throwing a number out there? And we get more dialogue than most, but it's very cryptic in a sense where it's really not much feedback that we can provide.
And the other thing I heard about U.S. benefits, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is every year there's a re-enrollment. So it's like a massive HR process to go through.
Yeah, it's an open enrollment. That's kind of your one time to jump on or off, and that's kind of typical to Canada too. But what happens is the individual market, you got one chance to get on there. So if someone wants to come onto your group plan, they've got to kind of make that decision at the appropriate time. The open enrollment is an important time of year to say the least because, if you don't experience a qualifying event mid-year, meaning a loss of coverage, marriage, birth, 26 and you age off your parents' plan, you can't just jump back on because you broke your leg. And they're very vigilant about that. So you really do have to kind of be focused. And, the young, dumb hockey player myself wasn't. And now once you have a couple pregnancies, you realize to pay attention to things. But it's critical that you get on these plans at the appropriate time. Because if you don't, and you have no coverage, which is a wild risk to take, you pull out your credit card for that $100,000 visit. And it's a tough situation.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit, what would you say are the biggest upcoming trends in U.S. healthcare as it compares to Canadian group benefits?
I think we're seeing more and more opportunities for voluntary coverages because it's tough for a lot of small corporations to sustain a lot of these plans. So members can buy up for additional life insurances or additional critical illness to kind of have some income replacement if they have that high year where they have, they get a knee surgery and they went to the, ER and it's to subsidize some of that because while these numbers probably seem really high, when you hit them, it's not like, we're not making salaries in the U.S. that are that much more inflated. So it's a very wounding thing when those years come. So there's more of that voluntary coverage. I think there's a lot more onus on short-term disability, long-term disability, because those can be really challenging times for, you hear more and more of members getting illnesses that are younger. And I think that's definitely something that's at the forefront. I think fertility and a lot of that stuff has come up a lot more because it's just more common. The IVF world is certainly more prevalent. So that's areas where I think groups are trying to be super competitive. And if anything, trying to tailor your menu of offerings to your different employees. So the 26-year-old dummy that I was that plays men's league hockey, they just want the plan that the least comes out of their paycheck. And then you've got another audience that has the 3 children that knows 2 of them are going to the ER for stitches a year and have a plan catered to them too and make it a consumer-driven selection. So that way you kind of appeal to all.
Yeah. And one thing that I've heard in the States is there is a lot more consumerism where the insurers will incent good behavior. If you wear a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or track that stuff, they will, and you give them access to it, they will adjust your rates appropriately, but I'm not sure if that's completely true.
No, it's true. There's incentives for it for the individual and also the corporation, right? And having those wellness plans where members are buying into it, there's definitely proven benefits to it, right? It takes a lot of involvement and engagement from the HR team typically, or the whole management team, but those can be beneficial. And certainly as you get larger and you start to do some self-funded products, they really laser into how your plan performs. So that's where you've got to be cognizant of, do we have 3 large claims? How can we mitigate those? And then once you have those big years, what are your options? Because unfortunately, there's not a lot of them.
For Canadian group benefit advisors who have a Canadian client and they ask, I'm expanding to the U.S., can you help me add U.S. benefits for my U.S. employees? What are the top 3 questions that an advisor should be asking north of the border?
Yeah, I think, and I used to call this the bottle of wine test, where I'd take a younger advisor at a large firm that had a big book of business. I'd say, grab a bottle of wine and just go through your list and go on your website and see if there's a U.S. location. If you just asked at renewal, think about this, to the HR team, the management team that sits in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, and you say, I noticed you've got an address in Manhattan and in DC. How's that going? Oh my God, it's 10 times more expensive. I don't really get it. We've never met our U.S. broker. How's it going? Well, I don't know. And unfortunately, and fortunately, I would say for our team, is that they're not probably getting the service on the US side that they are in the Canadian. So if you can kind of say, like, have you met that broker? Because uniquely, that's something that we do. Or do you feel like you're being looked after and seeing everything? And then most importantly, do you feel like someone's helping you when that US member asks questions? Those are like the hot buttons where 9 times out of 10, if those come up and the answer is not a wonderful one, well, maybe the next time I'm in town or my team's in town, we meet with them personally, which I think is a big separator, which is really nice because it gives them comfort to know that, like, that truly is all I do if I'm going to 10 meetings in 3 days in Toronto or Vancouver, right? So I think that's the easiest frame of mind is, do you have U.S. employees or intend to? Because sometimes they're like, well, we're thinking about going to the U.S., but we've done a stipend but then we can't hire people. So like, there's even a question mark there. And then do you feel like you're being looked after in the U.S. as you are in Canada? Because usually they're in good shape on the Canadian side. It's really the U.S. side that's like, and I always joke that one of our larger accounts was actually someone that couldn't get the Canadian. There was a mess on the U.S. side. We kind of went and cleaned that mess up and saved them a ton of money on the U.S. And then in turn, next year, they got the Canadian business. So it's almost like, even if you're prospective or you're an existing client, it's like worth checking the box. And if we get on a call, and this happens all the time, we get on a call and talk for 20 minutes and they feel better informed. If we work with them, great. It just still puts you in a better place as the Canadian advisor is like, okay, well, we've got you looked after there. Everything's in good order, or it's not, but you've had the dialogue with someone that kind of just does that.
I can attest to that exact thing. In a prior life, in a prior organization, I did a lot of cross-border benefits, but from the Canadian side down. And I was always being asked, Michael, do you know any U.S. advisor that provides the same level of service that you do to our Canadian staff? Because the U.S. side, like, they were boggled. Like, why aren't we getting the same service, if not better, when we're spending so much more,
Yeah.
right? Like the service should be better, you would think.
Well, no, that's just it, right? Like that's we say the ratio is 10-1, and it's pretty much is, right? If you're the CFO that sits in Vancouver and the company's 100 people in Canada, throughout Canada, yet you spend the same amount on 15 people in the US, well, I want someone to explain to me what's going on with the 15 people in the US. I don't get it as much because I'm the CFO, but someone better walk in here and just come up with some ideas, because strategically we spend all this time on our larger group in Canada, but from a pure cost perspective, like, we're in line with it. So, and they're not, they're not wrong, right? Like, they should. And I think a lot of the times with us, it's what happens is, like, a U.S. broker randomly gets it, right? If I'm a broker in Chicago and I get this one-off account in Vancouver, it's like, I'm not going all the way up there for one account. I'm going to do what I need to do and show up at renewal. And it kind of just landed in my lap. And I think that's where, if we have the right opportunity, I would say they're not doing as good a job as the Canadian advisors. It's just because it's not as important to them.
And it's interesting, the odd time that I would go down to the U.S., because there was a U.S. head office that was managing the group benefit plan in Canada, and I would go down to present the renewal, I would get laughed out of the boardroom because I would walk in with a 15% increase, but they would look at the total dollars and just go, the CFO would literally say to me, this isn't worth my time to consider. Just do whatever you need to do, right?
Totally. And that's why even like the smaller groups, that they matter, right? They do. And that's why, for our kind of growing network of advisors, like, we always say, like, there's advisors I work with, and then 2 years later on a Friday call me and they're like, this group has 50 employees in the US. They think they've been doing it wrong for a couple of years. Well, then that maybe we can really provide some good solutions there. And I think one of the big things too is, like, if you're the HR director in Toronto, if I alone tell you, hey, do you want me to do the webinar and the open enrollment and explain the plan to all these U.S. employees that are not as kind as Canadians? I can say that. You can't. That they aren't afraid to ask, and they push, and I'll be your buffer the next time someone comes up with a question. That's something that they would like some comfort in, knowing they have the proper consultation rather than getting on ChatGPT and trying to figure it out, right? So I think that there's an element of, like, I've got someone looking after us just as much as for me as my employees.
Now let's get to the heart of the matter. I know you support a lot of Canadian advisors with their U.S. Counterparts or subsidiaries in the U.S. What does that look like? How did you get involved? How do people reach out to you?
Yeah, so I think for an advisor, I think kind of use us as a tool at any time. It's always great to have a good dialogue, and then if things come to fruition, wonderful. Typically, I would say the advisors we've worked with the most, they give us a glowing recommendation on the beginning of a call, and they might as well go on mute because they know enough. When you want to talk about the UK, I bring in a counterpart of mine, and you won't hear from me. So I think a glowing recommendation, say, hey, we just want to make sure everyone's on the same page and you're getting the right stuff in the US. We're confident in Ned and his team. Then kind of we can run with it from there and keep that advisor in the loop as much as kind of need be. And really, it's typically on a Zoom. How are things going? We kind of poke through some pain points that they likely have, and then we can either take over on a broker of record or we can set up a new plan, whatever the requirement is. And then what's nice is we recognize the Canadian advisors in perpetuity, meaning if you bring me into a deal in September of 2025, if you lose it in February of 26, I always take care of that broker for the long run. So I think there is some gravy, some small revenue that can be looked after. But I think the biggest thing is if I'm a Canadian advisor, I don't want a hub or a large international presence like an Aon. I don't want them talking to my client anywhere, because odds are if there's someone in Boston, Massachusetts that does brokerage and your client has a presence, there's probably a good chance they have a counterpart in Canada. So it's almost like we're a shield, a little bit of an agnostic shield, because we have no presence in Canada, right? So as soon as you got us kind of looking after it here, we're all kind of in good order. That's kind of the thought process, because you wouldn't want someone working with it here that indirectly you compete with in the GTA. So I think that is one layer of, the security, you look good, your important client that you care about, that Canadian portion of business is well looked after. And then there's a nice kind of revenue stream of 20% of what we send north of the border every month is a nice way to kind of button it up.
That is an amazing arrangement. And I've worked similarly in the past with other US advisors, where if the US business was under attack, I would help protect them. If the Canadian business was under attack, they would help protect me. And being that one source for their clients is an amazing advantage. And you never want to give that up to any other organization that maybe you don't have a relationship with. So building that cross-border relationship is absolutely key.
Yeah, I think we've seen people use it to get the Canadian business. We've seen them use it. I always joke, one of our largest paying advisors we've done one deal with, and it originated, they thought it was 2 to 4 people. It was 2 to 400, and it's now thousands of employees. And that advisor actually no longer has the Canadian business, but still get recognized on the U.S. part. So although they've kind of lost it up north, and obviously that's not the objective, but for whatever reasons, they're still, we kind of die on the hill of loyalty of who marched us in the room. If we lose in the long game because of that, we'd rather be on that side of the fence. But that's kind of the thought process is always like, have someone cover your rear end down here. You can make some referral revenue, which is great. You focus on what you're great at in Canada, and then everyone feels like we're in good order. And when the next time you're driving to a renewal meeting and you see they have an address in Florida, you just check the 3 boxes and have a dialogue if need be.
Exactly. Any questions I should be asking you as part of this podcast?
No, not really. I think what's nice too is we're frequently in Canada. So that is definitely a separator, because odds are like you come across a good sized group and things are okay. Well, guess what? They've never met that broker. So we're always like, we have a large network of Canadian advisors. We always tell them kind of a month out, hey, we're going to be in town. If you want to grab coffee, great. If you think this might be a good time to talk to the group we talked to 3 months ago, in person never hurts. I know it's something that is a little bit of a lost art in our post-COVID world, but kind of a way that we now look at as a separator, where if you can get in the room and have a nice dialogue, it can be successful.
Perfect. Ned, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. You shared some fantastic insights that I know our listeners will be able to put into practice right away. That's a wrap on this episode of 18-Minute Experts. Our goal is always to give Canadian Group Benefits advisors straightforward, independent strategies that they can use to stand out with their clients and prospects. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you're always in the loop on when the next conversation drops. At the end of the day, group benefits isn't just about plans and policies. It's about equipping yourself with the right knowledge to make a difference. Keep learning, keep leading, and we'll see you next time on 18 Minute Experts.